Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending Improving's December 18th virtual lunch and learn. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenters at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Claudio Lassala, who is a technical director at Improving Houston, and Sarah Kim, co-founder of Culture and Strategy. Today, they will be sharing a webinar titled Building Stronger Online Communities. The floor is all yours, guys.
All right, thanks, Shervin. Hello, Sarah. It's a pleasure being here talking about communities. It's one of my area of passion. So thanks everybody for joining in, taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule to join us here in this corner of the internet. We really appreciate it. How's it going, Sarah?
It's going good. It's always nice to touch base with you. Claudio, we used to work together, so this is nice being on screen to chat.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for joining us today to have this talk around communities, right? So while we work together as software developers building software, we've also had several conversations about community. I've been involved with the communities for at least like 22 years or so, and we talked a lot about that. So before I tell folks or share my story with communities, I would like to start by posing a question to the audience. Like right now, you guys are joining a community. This is a little community, right? It's the community of, improving events, virtual events that you are joining in. I'm pretty sure, or I would hope that you guys also share other communities. The question is, why do you do it? When you join a community event like this one, or user groups, or whatever kind of community, why do you do that, right? What is your main driving force? So while the audience is busy, answering that question, Sarah, what about you? What has driven you to communities?
Well, I've always been interested in various things. When I first moved over to the US and, did a career transition into technology, I was interested to learn more about code. I was interested to network, to learn more from my peers who were also in the development world. I was interested at that time also to find a job. And so those were really the reasons why I joined technical communities at the time.
Nice. Yeah, that's it's very similar to me. So for me, originally from Brazil, back in the late 90s, I was switching jobs. And at the new job, the tech stack I had to work with was Foxborough, which at the time I knew pretty much close to zero. So that was around the time where like internet was becoming a big thing in Brazil. So found out about like online forums and places I could go and ask questions. And that was like my introduction. It's through the need of, okay, I need to learn something. In that tech stack, the resources in Portuguese, our native language there, they were very scarce. We didn't have much. There was a lot in English. So I found some Brazilian communities that I joined online to ask questions, answer questions. But then since I knew a little bit of English at the time, I was also able to find articles or books in English. And then as I was seeing questions in the Brazilian forums, I'm like, okay, I don't know the answer to that question. Let me look it up in English, see what I find, and then I will relay the response back to the Brazilian community, right? So at the same time, I was learning the tech stack, I was practicing my English, and I was helping out some other people, which was funny because eventually people thought that I was the expert because I was giving answers. So it took them a while until I said, no, guys, I'm just looking it up and I'm learning as we go, right?
That's a really good point, Claudio. For those who are listening on this call today, that's a really great call out, Claudio, because you join a community and then you realize that people are asking certain questions that you may not personally know the answer to. You go look it up and then you share it with the community, and that builds up your expertise and builds up your credibility and reputation as a thought leader within that community, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because when you mention something like this, depending on where some people come from, they're going to be like, Why are you doing Google search for somebody else? Right? It's like, no, you're missing the point, right? That's not the idea. It's I'm learning, I'm taking the time to like, I'm stacking up skills. I'm stacking up my networking skills, my English skills, my technology skills, right? It's a win-win, right?
It's a win-win, yeah. And, you know, we talk about technical communities. The other thing that I've always been interested about being in technology, I've always been thinking about intersections with other topics. So, you know, I experimented with, you know, learning more about user experience. I experimented with learning more about product management and even project management, even though, you know, people have been moving more to the agile methodologies. And then I looked into agile, right? And so, you know, for those of you here who are part of various communities within the Houston network, for those topics, you may have seen me in one of your events over the past few years. You know, I've always been interested in that. And more recently, I have been interested in things to do with leadership, strategy, and culture. And then I realized that there isn't a community for that, you know? So that got me thinking, if I had this interest to learn myself, and there wasn't a community for that, why not build my own community?
Oh, yeah.
So the next part, right, Claudio? Why build a community?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, before we actually jump into that, that's a great segue. But let's first hear, Shervin, did we get questions from the attendees at this point?
Not yet, guys, but I'm sure they're going to come.
Okay, not a problem. So yeah, that's a huge point that I remember us talking about it exactly like that, right? Because as you have a special need, maybe you're trying to learn something, maybe you're trying to connect with other people because you're looking for a job or looking for, you know, ideas or resources around something. Hopefully there's going to be a community out there. Now, what do you do if there isn't a community already available? Well, you go ahead and you create one, right? So tell us about your experience. How did it go about?
So, like I mentioned, you know, I found this niche area, and I was like thinking to myself, okay, this is a great intersection because even in technology, that at some point, you know, after you learn what it is, you know, how to problem solve and you know how to pick up new frameworks and technologies quickly, at some point you may be interested in other topics like leadership. And then as you perhaps, you know, you pick up a supervisory role as a lead or something like that, and you have a team, then you're thinking to yourself, okay, how can I lead teams better? Right? So that was my journey, and I was trying to figure out what are some of the things that tick for my team, what are some of the things that tick for my company, and then also in time, you know, I started my own business as well. So how does that all work out? And that came down to the 3 areas of leadership, strategy, and culture. And I couldn't find a community here that really catered to that interest, especially since I'm coming from tech. And so I started my own community for that called Culture Collective here in Houston. But, you know, in terms of the mechanics of how I started it, you know, what I did was I did some research around not just Houston, but around the world to see if there were already communities related to this area. And then I found this community called Culture Collective, which was available at that time in other cities and other places in the world, but not in Houston. And so I started the Houston chapter. So that's but Claudio, you too started communities. So why did you start communities?
Yeah, so along the same lines, right? So as we look for, so for one thing, like I came to know that a lot of, if we're talking about technical communities, there are a lot of developers or technical oriented folks that they don't even go out to communities. Like I've worked with several software developers that when I talk about, oh, I'm giving a talk at a user group or I'm attending a conference, they're like, what's so great about it? Or no, I never go out to any of those, right? Well, so first people need to have this need, or even if they don't feel like they have a need, they should go out and see what's out there. Because back in the day, I always joke, come from the pizza-oriented or pizza-driven developments, where you know we were given requirements locked in a room, and then people would every once in a while slide pizza under the door. And so we would not really, like, developers would be seen as people who live in caves, and eventually they put out some work. There's not a lot of like socializing and networking. Eventually I grew out of that, fortunately, and then it's like you go from being like this in front of your computer, you open up your horizons. For one thing, yeah, you can stick with your technical communities and learn and become better, sharper at the technologies that you use. Eventually you're going to start fine-tuning that. So for example, for many years I've been involved with the .NET community because that was the main tech stack I've used for many years. Sometime last year, I was looking for a community where most of the talks were around, writing clean code or refactoring code, because like, yeah, a lot of user groups are talking about, oh, here's a new version of C#, here's a new version of React, here's a new version of whatever. And many times, like on my daily basis, I'm not working with those new versions of everything. I'm working with old versions of old code that we need to maintain. So who's talking about cleaning up code and refactoring, the different strategies to that? I couldn't find anything tailored to it. So I said, I'll just go ahead and create a user group, smartly named Improving Code, right? Because that's really it. When I'm looking at code, I'm always thinking, how can I improve the code that I have at hand? Right, so that was like one motivation for me to create that one community. Another one was back in 2007, somebody introduced me to the concept of brown bag meetings, right? Which is lunch and learns, right? Bringing your lunch in a brown bag, getting together in a conference room and just sharing whatever, things that you've learned, challenges that you have to overcome. So I started doing that at the company I worked at the time. And then I shared this at some user group talks, and then I had people saying, oh, that's great, but like my company, we have very few developers, we don't talk much about ourselves, they're not into this kind of thing, or I work by myself as an independent, what do I do? Couldn't we do something like that online? I said, yeah, sure. So that's how I created the Virtual Brown Bag back then, which we've done it for a couple of years, we've went on a hiatus, we came back, so folks on this call, virtualbrownbag.com. This is something that I do every Thursday, 12 through 1 Central Time, and it's another type of a community. Now, as you called out for, we have the technical communities, we have things around leadership and culture. Like, where else do we go with that, right? So another community that I ended up creating is one for motorcycle racetrack riders, right? Because there are the motorcycle riders clubs that people get together to drink beer and talk bikes. And I said, okay, that's not exactly what I need. I want something more focused on people who are very methodical about track riding techniques and analyzing what we are doing. So there's more I want out of it. I couldn't find anything like that. I'm creating one. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome, Claudio. It's so interesting how, in various aspects of your life, it doesn't matter whether it's work or your passions, you have built communities all around. I think that's something that, the audience who's listening should probably take a leaf out of your book. It doesn't matter whether you're good in an area, you may be trying to learn, and that may well be your ticket to or your driver to starting a new community yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to expand on that. Let's hold that thought. I do want to expand on that. I'm seeing some questions come in. Shervin, can you relay the questions to us, please?
Sure. So we got a couple to ask you guys.
All right.
The first one is, what do you suggest for someone who might be a little intimidated by professional communities in general? What's a good way to get over this impediment?
Oh, I love that question. This is a huge misconception where people do get this like, oh, in a technical community, there's going to be a lot of real smart people who know a lot of stuff. So I'm afraid of like asking, questions that people are going to be like, why are you asking these questions? You're always going to run into people who are like that. Fortunately, most communities are not like that. the real smart people who know a lot of stuff, they're probably not participating in those communities. They're busy building even bigger things, right? So you, like an example that I will always bring up, right? I've been a huge follower of, say, Martin Fowler, Uncle Bob, these guys who are like really thought leaders in the industry who have been for many years. Then when I've learned about object-oriented programming, I was so excited. It's like, oh, no, I actually understand what this thing is all about. I want to tell other people. Well, but then I could think, I'm not going to give a talk because what if Martin Fowler is sitting there or one of these guys and they're going to go like, no, dude, you got this all wrong. It's like, that's never going to happen, right? So you just get out there and you share with people. Now, my recommendation to folks is don't try to come out and saying, oh, you know, I know everything about JavaScript. I know everything about C#. I know, well, now you're setting that expectation. People will call you out on that. If you come out, like my favorite thing to do is just as I learned something, I want to share with people, I will preface my talk with those things. I say, hey, I have just started learning this thing. Look what I got. If anybody knows more than me, please jump in and help me out and help out other folks. So just before, forward with setting the expectations. Just let people know, look, this is my current level of experience and I'm here for, and let others know what are you there for. I'm here to just get started on this technology, or I'm here to learn from other people's struggles trying to learn the same thing, because you're very likely to meet other folks who are just going through the same hurdles as you are, right? So you can relate at that level. We are having the same struggles. How do we get out of it, guys?
Yeah.
Sarah, what are your words on it?
Yeah, so Claudio, you're so right about that. It's so important to understand that you're not the only one that may not know something. But in terms of this question, I like to take a step back on it and even look even more to the basics. What if you're somebody who is on the fence about joining a community and you're a little bit intimidated because it's a professional community, you know, you don't know how to take that first step? Well, we're in a virtual environment, and it kind of brings us to the next part of the discussion, right? Talking about online communities. We're in a virtual environment right now. Even today, you know, if you're joining, I can't see you. I can see Claudio, but I can't see you. That's one way to start, you know, checking out these communities. Now you get a little feel for how improving does certain events, right? There are also other technical communities out there that actually have, they use things like Zoom where you see everybody on the screen. But guess what? If that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you can turn off your video first and take a little check-in with that group to see how they're like. And then at some point you feel comfortable, you turn on your camera. So it kind of answers the second question at the same time, like how do we suggest finding safe online communities, right? Same thing, we're in a virtual environment right now. Most things are online. So you could sign up for an event, you know, and just show up, turn off your video, take a check-in. Are they really legit? Like, you know, what are they trying to share with me? You know, are they sharing about new technologies, or are they talking about other things? Like, is this like a happy hour? Do I actually get a chance to interact? Like perhaps Claudio and I may have different goals when we join a community. I perhaps am more of a people person. I want to meet people, right? So, you know, coming onto a session where people are just sharing a new technology with me and I don't get a chance to interact, I might not like that. But for other people, it may be, I just want to technology to share. And that, you know, comes back to Claudio's point. If I want to share and I don't know how to share, just pick one community, get to know them, and then say, hey, I'm learning this and I would like to experiment with the group. Can I share some ideas? And maybe, you know, in this virtual environment, it's great for collaboration. Maybe we can brainstorm together. Something like that, you know, would be a good way to break in.
Yeah,
Love
it.
Yeah.
Do you guys do you mind if I ask you another question?
Sure.
So I'm going to add to this one because I'm assuming they mean online, but they could have meant in person as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest for finding safe online communities? Is there a way to know a community is reputable?
Is there a way to know? So what I've personally done when looking for communities, I do look for how people talk, how they refer to one another, and more importantly, I specifically look for how they answer people's questions when they're like novice in whatever it is that they are doing. Because, like, for example, technical communities. We developers, we are so bad a lot of the times where, we do something for many years, we get really good at it, and then we run into somebody who's just maybe getting started or that comes from a different background, different levels of experience, and then we look at that person's work and we say, oh, you're doing it all wrong. We are so good at saying that other people are doing it all wrong and we know everything. That's pretty bad, right? And it's something that I used to do that a lot, right? So I can definitely speak from experience. It took me a while with, interacting with others, trying to have empathy and understanding, where people are coming from. Like I've had situations where I had to work with people who are like in theory more experienced than me in the sense that they've been doing it way longer, but they've crossed different paths. They've traveled different paths than I have, right? And you have to recognize those things. So to me, when I look for online communities, again, I specifically look, okay, if I get into a community where, say, a beginner, a novice, has to preface a question with, I am sorry for the dumb question, but, right, it's like, the community should be more welcoming. It's like, there are no dumb questions. Nobody here knows everything. We're trying to learn together, right? So I look for these pointers. If I see like, the kind of answer that's like, oh, you should know this by now. Oh, you've been doing .NET for 10 years. You should know this by now. Like, not necessarily, dude. I come from a different background. How else would I have learned it, right? Sarah, what do you think?
Well, for me, and I don't know if this is going to work for everybody, or you may not like to do something like that. But for me, before I join a community, what I like to do is I like to do some research on the community first. So there may be a website for the community, or the community might be a part of a bigger initiative. So I would like to go look up online about those things. Sometimes there are communities that don't have that kind of presence online. I like to look up previous events that they had run. So perhaps they are on meetup.com. You always can look at previous meetings by the same organizer. Or if you're on Eventbrite, same thing. You can look up previous meetings. You can take a look at how they blurb, what kind of guest speakers they bring in, what kind of specific topics they like to cover. Is that really something I'm interested in? How well do they describe these things? That's one way you can look at it. And then if those information is not very clear, that might be a good filter for you already. But one other thing I like to do is I also like to look up the community leader. If you can't find a website for this person, maybe they have a LinkedIn profile. It sounds a bit stocky, but sometimes it's good to know who you're kind of placing your trust in by joining those communities. To me, that's important.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I do know there are a couple of more questions come in, but I do want to, before we take the new questions, let's just take one step back and go back to that thought that I said, okay, let's hold on that.
Yeah.
About, like, if you do want to start a community, like a lot of people don't start a community or even don't start like creating a new talk to share with people because it's like, well, I'm not an expert on the subject matter. I don't know enough. It's like, forget about those things, right? If you have a need of a specific topic, whatever that might be, there are many ways you can go about it. One is maybe you are the expert, so please share. If you're an expert on anything, find ways for you to share that, period, right? If you're not an expert, maybe you are trying to learn the thing, share it. Again, I've heard this from many different brilliant minds that the best time to teach somebody is when you just learned it, because you can still relate. You remember what it felt like not knowing that thing. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't know that until 2 weeks ago. It was painful. Here, this is what I've learned. You can relate to that person. Years go by, you're going to forget that experience. So if somebody comes around and asks you a question around that thing, you're going to just say it like it's natural. I was born like that. We lose touch with that. So that's why many times I say the best person to give others advice, not necessarily are the experts, right? Because they're already so far gone down that road. It's hard to relate that way. So keep an eye on that.
Agree.
Right?
Yes.
And then the third thing would be, you're not an expert. You haven't started learning, or you're really stumbling hard. Go find somebody else. Be a knowledge broker, right? Find somebody who's already at the stage where you would like to be, or that's my final destination. That person is already living the thing I would like to have. Reach out to that person, say, hey, I have these questions. I have a bunch of people here who have similar questions. Could you please come in and just share a little bit about it? Just reach out to folks, right? What are your thoughts on it, Sarah?
I agree with you. Actually, that kind of reminds me of my experience over the past 2 weekends. I had somehow came across a Python community, but mind y'all, I don't code in Python, but I came across the Python community, and the community leader was curious, would you come in and share a little bit more about, your experience transitioning into development way back then? Do you still have that fresh in mind? And I'm like, I had to go and remember, like, how did that feel like? But it was so refreshing when I actually shared that experience with the group. And then now that you mentioned this, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should do more of that to remember, that time where I was struggling and trying to learn everything, at once. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that time now. It was not easy. But that's why you join communities, because you have that camaraderie feeling, right?
Yeah.
Not because you need that kind of like touchy-feely kind of, hey, we're doing this together, but more like, hey, we're in this challenge together. What are some of the challenges you face? And this is what I face. Hey, let me help you, or maybe you can help me, kind of situation, right?
Yeah. Right. Excellent. Let's see, Shervin, what do we have? Question come in.
Oh, it looks like we have something about, what if I set up a community and no one comes, or participation is very low? Yeah. I got a good answer for that one. Okay. Claudio, remember when I was about to start I was thinking about starting the community, and I had reached out to you because, you have quite a few communities that you lead. And I was curious, like, what do I have to do, to start a community? Like, and remember what you told me? You're like, just do it.
Yeah.
You said just do it, right? And so I ended up, I just did it. But all along in my head, I thought like you. I don't know who you are who put this question here, but I thought the same thing. What if no one comes and participation is low? You know what I ended up thinking? If I have one participant that's not my husband, I'm going for a drink. And that first meeting, I had 18 participants, not including my husband. And so that night I had a good drink.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally relate that. I love that question. And here's something that I always share with people. I was still in Brazil, 2002. I get invited to speak at the Microsoft PDC conference. It's a big deal, right? Now, I was one of the main FoxPro guys back then. So, and that was around the time when .NET came out. And the talk that Microsoft asked me to do was the integration between FoxPro and .NET, right? The early ages of web services and all that. Cool. I put together the content. I go to the presentation room. It's a room for like 200 people, fancy hotel, like the whole infrastructure. The two guys at the back sitting there, to help out audience members and everything. I'm up in the pulpit to start my talk. There is one person in the audience. One person. Imagine like the pressure, right? There's room for like 300 people. There's one guy sitting by himself there, besides like the security guy all the way down at the back of the room. I gave my talk as if I had 1,000,000 people in front of me. It's like, I do not care. I've put the work into preparing for this talk. I have all the storylines, everything in my mind. I'm going to put it out. There's one guy sitting right here. This guy got like a one-on-one coaching session, in here, but I just did my thing, right? The way I normally do, which I get very excited. I talk with my hands a lot. So things that came out of it. This one person who was in the audience became a friend, and we've conducted like some businesses afterwards, some little projects. We got in touch. Every time that after I moved to the US, anytime I would go back to Brazil, this guy had a company. He would offer an office at his company for me to go there and do some remote work and use his internet. But the most interesting thing about this one security guy all the way at the back of the room, I noticed in other sessions, this guy was like always like leaning back and almost like falling asleep. On my talk, I noticed him like leaning forward. And then at the end of the talk, I said, "Hey guys, did you get anything out of the talk?" Like making fun. And he was like, "Sir, I don't know anything about these programming things that you're talking. But because of the way that you were talking, so excited, it actually drew my curiosity and attention. And I was paying attention to everything I could actually make out of it." So it really does not matter if you have a crowd of thousands of people or one person. And like some of the communities that I run, we don't draw hundreds of people. We have sometimes a handful that's like 6, 10. And I always tell the guys, I thank them very much for showing up. And I say, as long as there's one person showing up that I can talk to, I'm doing this. And if nobody shows up, I'll do it to my computer, I'll record it, and I'm going to put it out, because there's going to be somebody on the other side of the world who will watch that. And sometimes they do, and they send a message saying, "Thank you so much for putting that out." There's always someone listening. So if you are going for, "Oh yeah, I want to create a community and draw 1,000 people," why? Why is that important? Are you sure you want 1,000 people? Because then you're going to gather a crowd that not necessarily is your crowd, the people that really you can deliver value and that can bring you value back in return, right? You may just have people out there that have nothing to do in life, and all they want to do is crash somebody else's party.
Yep.
Right?
That's so true, Claudio. I love that story about the one guy in the auditorium. But it's so important that you tied it back to the kind of opportunities that you got after the event. That is so important to realize that actually, it's scary at the beginning when you're trying to set up your community and you're afraid that, or rather a little worried that perhaps there will be no participation or low participation. Doesn't really matter. And Claudio, correct me if I'm wrong, when we're first starting a community, like when you first start your first one, in fact, you're thinking to yourself, maybe if it's a smaller community, you can experiment and make mistakes at that time. And then when the community grows, you grow together. Was that a similar journey for you as well?
That's exactly right. I mean, every single community I start, like when I started my community that's called Beyond the Track for my track riding buddies, it was like that. I spent like pretty much a year researching into, okay, how do I do this safely? Because it is a dangerous sport. How do I do that safely? What do I need to know? I want to know everything that I don't know yet so that I'm prepared. So I did a lot of research on that. And then I'm sitting on top of all of this research results that I got, and I feel like I need to share this. I need to tell other people. I'm not an expert, racer or anything like that, but I do have some knowledge that other people may benefit. So what did I do? Well, let me start a community. I came to the improving office, right? I got clearance to start a community like that. I invited people. I got like 12 people in the first meeting. I shared my things, and they were like, "Oh, this is pretty awesome." And I've been doing it for 3 years, every single month. Now, at school, on the very first like 6 months, I was the one doing the sharing, even though I was like learning, sharing, learning, sharing, learning, sharing, always prefacing the meeting saying, I'm a novice, guys. This is my level of experience right now. Please keep that in mind. Over time, I started drawing more people who are focused, sharing the same values. What comes out of it? More people stepping up to do the sharing part, because they see the kind of laid back environment that I'm fostering, and they feel like, oh, it's safe to share. There's no judgment. There's no people saying, oh, you're doing it all wrong. It's like, oh, right? And so whenever, like, maybe there's a month where I'm too busy with other things, I don't have the time or the mind space to create something to share, somebody else from the community steps up and says, oh, I get it. Don't worry about it. I'm like, oh, thanks, guys. So the community just grows and, continues on like that.
Yeah, that's awesome, Claudio. I see that we have one more question there about online trolls. So this one's interesting, right? This one's interesting. Claudio, what do you think about online trolls? Because something tells me that even online trolls, they spent the time to come and see you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what happens is it's how you relate to those things. Those people are always going to be out there. How you react to it is what's going to give them fuel, right? You can just like shake that. I was like, yeah, all right, haha, you were very funny, cool. Moving on, right? I never spend a lot of time with folks like that. I've had people show up in meetings like that. I recognize the person. You're polite, you're, an educated person, right? The community will see that. Will see what the troll is trying to do. That person will phase out. If people start like throwing fuel at the fire, it's gonna grow. You just recognize that and you move on, right? Do not spend time on it. That person will move on and it will look for other communities where they can actually stir up, crazy things with the crowd. So
yeah. In fact, when we talk about actual tools because we're talking about online communities, right? In today's world, in online communities, what I've noticed is that if people are encouraged to turn on their video in those kind of like, the tool I use is Zoom, but for those kinds of communities where I actually see your face and we're trying to build a relationship as a community, those kinds of communities, I see less of these online trolls. I mean, they still exist. Some people just come on and trying to wreck the meeting by giving off a different kind of vibe. I understand. But I think this is quite common, or at least I've experienced it in platforms like Twitch. And I've seen some people engage, like you mentioned, you probably shouldn't, you don't want to engage in them to add fuel for them to continue doing it. But I've also seen some people, they do it really interesting. They address these comments very, I think it's quite smart actually. They actually call the person out and I'm like, oh, it sounds like you really took the time to join us today. Thank you so much, for coming to join a party or coming to join our peer coding session or something. I've seen that happen, and oftentimes, I don't see a response after that. It's just quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, because I do a lot of that. It's just on how you respond, right? So often, I post something to one of my communities, and then it's something like aimed at the novice, intermediate folks, and then you get like some, ha ha ha, great funny remarks, like putting things down. I usually flip that around. I make like a funny comment on top of it, keeping it light and polite. The community sees that. It's easy for the community to see, okay, who's being, the bad person here, and who's being the helpful person, the person who I've come here for, right? And it will filter itself out. So, don't mind, the negativities that go out there. It's just how we react to it that's more important.
Exactly. I think that, you know, today we wanted to talk more about building stronger communities. So we try to address some of them in the questions. But Claudio, remember a few days ago we were talking about, you know, how do we link it back to one of the lunch and learns that happened here too, on one of the improving events. You know, we were talking about, so we covered no-shows. What about things like lack of engagement? You know, because that's also a thing, right? For community leaders who already have a community and now trying to, you know, build the community in this pandemic in an online space. What are some of the things that you've tried in terms of, you know, building engagement?
Right, that's a great question. So because I handle very different communities, like with different purposes, I always have to keep that in mind. So if I'm catering for a community where the main thing is like giving a full-blown like webinar type of talk, right, where there's like, you know, start, middle, end, you know, this is the whole arc for the topic that I want to get out. As the presenter, I may tell the crowd, look, I am going to be taking questions during the presentation, or hold your questions, I'm going to be taking them at the end. And that's where the engagement happens. But at a user group setup, and this is something that I've been talking to people a lot, if somebody wants to just learn about something, that's all the person needs, there's plural sites, there are YouTube channels, there's a lot out there that they can use to learn. So as far as communities go, what we get the most out of it, so if it's like a webinar type of thing, we try to have some time at the beginning where people can socialize and interact. And then making use of like breakout rooms, right? You know, create smaller rooms, let people talk, maybe let them talk among themselves, answering questions like, why did you come here today? Like, are there any specific challenges that you hope to have answers at this meeting? Or you're just trying to learn this new technology and see where they are going with it. Have them talk, bring them back into the main room, have the talk, and then at the end, do the same thing. Keep make like another 30 minutes where you can have breakout rooms for people to talk about, and then maybe have the drop into those individual rooms to see what people are talking about, what they got out of the session. That's one way to go about it. Another one is, if it is a topic that we just want to toss it to the group and have conversations, which is two of my groups are similar to that, where we just get into this room as if we were like in presence, a physical room. We say, okay, this is the topic, let's talking. And you get just people talking. You make sure to make it safe for people to talk. There's gotta be at least one person in the room with facilitation skills to make sure that, hey, there's one guy who's demanding all of the time. He's like the person who talks a lot. Let's make sure to control that guy, acknowledge all the excitement and the willingness to share, but make sure to allow others to talk. So like being able to read the room, because there's like the quieter folks that sometimes you can read that they're like they're trying to say something and the other guys are not recognizing. So it's good to have at least one person who can read people like that and say, that's great, let's hold that thought, you know, ma'am, sir, please go ahead and, you know. So facilitation skills, we talked about that, right?
Yes.
How did you say, what was the sentence you were going to use around that?
Well, if there's one thing you take away from 2020, it is facilitation, because you know, those of you here who are community leaders, I think you realize when you set up your online meetings, the most important thing is the facilitation. I mean, if you're doing a more like a one way kind of instruction, then yeah, maybe a little less facilitation. But the minute you're saying let's have engagement and let's have more people take part in a discussion, a conversation, or the if you are trying to provide the ability of network, the facilitation skills is so important. Think about in pre-pandemic times when we met in person. You know, if I were in a new environment, say Claudio, I met you at the Beyond the Track meeting, and I've never ridden. Well, I have ridden a motorcycle, but I don't know how to drive a motorcycle, and I want to get to know someone else. I would probably approach you to facilitate an intro instead of going straight up to someone, right? So it's the same thing in a virtual environment. How do you actually facilitate certain discoveries, facilitate certain introductions for people to meet each other? How do you facilitate, connectivity between, let's say you have a room of 10 people. How do you make sure that all 10 get to know each other? Let's say you're using a tool that doesn't allow breakout rooms. How do you actually engage all of them? That's the role, the facilitator, So if there's one thing you pick up from this, it's you got to build facilitation skills. So I'm actually curious now, for those of you who have led communities, or for those of you who have joined communities, or even those of you who are not really part of communities, but you work for somebody, right? You work in a company. What are some of the activities that you have tried yourself? If you can put that down in the chat, I'm pretty sure, we can learn from each other. What are some of the activities you've done, or perhaps, you may have in virtual happy hours, you might have played certain games, or Claudio, if you remember, we did an event with Culture Collective on Wednesday, and we tried out what? Team collaboration and improv, right? And so we experimented with some improv. That was really interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did some improv. I took some improv classes earlier this year, and I've brought forward a lot of my learnings from that. Right, like the thing about learning how to read people's body language when somebody wants to try to speak, but the person, is introverted. Maybe, you have to pull that person in and help that person feel comfortable with sharing, right? We are in this together. Like, let's lean in and let's make it comfortable and safe for people to actually share their minds. Because how many times have we missed real great conversations and ideas because somebody didn't feel safe sharing their ideas, because they felt like, oh, if I say this, it's going to be the most, the dumbest thing ever. And it's like, no, that's not dumb at all.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to pause.
So true. Yeah. And, I thought I also do a quick sharing of some of the tools that, we discussed previously. We even tried things like, when we're trying to facilitate conversations, sometimes you do need some kind of visual. And one of the tools that I personally love to use is this tool called Mentimeter. For those who are interested, I will put it in, I'll share it with Shervin so that he can share it with the group. But this is a really good tool for things like word clouds. Say, for example, you had a question and you're curious about what people think when they let's say, what's a word that comes to mind when they think of leadership, or what's a word that comes to mind when they think of agile, right? And then you actually have people put that one word in a form, and then at the end of it, you get a word cloud. So what I like to do with those things is, at the end, I get the word cloud, and then at the end of the meeting, when everyone's gone back to what they have to do, I can share it on social media. I can share it in the group communities. And that kind of brings us to the next point, which is, Claudio, we want to talk about things to do with pre and post event, right? Because building stronger communities is not just about the meeting itself.
That's exactly right. So yes, thanks for taking us to like the last stint of this talk. So before we get into it, do we have any more questions, Shervin?
No, not currently, no.
Okay, sounds good. So yes, this is a huge point for me, because some people look at communities as like, oh yeah, there's this user group that gets together once a month for an hour, we share a thing, or somebody shares something, and then we are off. Well, I really enjoy the communities built around that. So the getting together once a month or however often you do, that's just one part of it. Feeling into it, coming out of it is way bigger. So for different groups, I use different things. So for example, for the virtual brown bag, where we get together every week to talk about lessons learned during that week, right? So we have a Slack channel where people can post something, say, hey, I've been messing with this, I've been playing with that, I have been having challenges with this. by posting that prior to our meeting, it gives us a chance to maybe reach out to other people who we can invite to the call to provide input or insight into those things that we were going to be talking about. We go through the meeting, we run out of time, right? And we feel like, oh man, there's still so much to talk about it. Well, jump back into that Slack channel and continue the conversation, right? Just keep building on that. With my Beyond the Track community, what we do is we've created a group on WhatsApp to stay in touch. So when we're thinking about going out to a certain track, we say, hey, I'm going this weekend to this track. Oh, cool, I'm also going. Great, what are we going to be working on when you're at the track? Oh, I'm going to be working on my braking skills, on my visual. Oh, I'm going to be doing the same. Let's hold each other accountable to make sure that we are sticking to our plan, right? When we go to the track, we come back and it's like, oh, I've had some difficulties with X. Oh, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to reach out to people who I know are good at that topic, and I'm going to invite them to give us a talk next month. Yep. So it keeps feeding and it keeps like snowballing in a very good way, right? It's not like avalanche, oh my God. It's like, no, it's growing, right?
Yeah, it's a great way to keep the conversation going. It's a great way to allow people to network outside of the events, because what I've noticed in online events is people really keep to the time for the most part. Like if it's 1 hour, they're in on the hour, the dot, and then they come off like at the end of your session that they've gone off. But if you have opportunities to give them a group where they can be a part of, that's a great way, Claudio. Slack, WhatsApp, even Facebook groups work. I know that Agile Leadership Network uses LinkedIn groups. So does there is a product owners community for product. I
think product owners,
yeah, but there's a product owners community too that uses LinkedIn groups. So those are really great ways to keep your keep the conversation going. I mean, in terms of networking, I think that's where a lot of the networking happens. You could on the other side of it, you could actually set up one of your, let's say you have meetings every month, like in my collective, we actually meet once a month, every third Wednesday of the month. And during that meetup, we actually talk about anything to do with strategy, culture, or leadership, or a combination. And whenever we have those discussions, I would share it within our Slack community, but I also reach out to my LinkedIn community through a message, so a post before and also a post after, just to keep the conversation going. And in fact, Claudio, I really like your practice of, how you do a little blog post before and after your events. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So that's something that started doing a long time ago. When I'm talking to people, when people are asking me questions and I see like some recurring questions and I see like my thought process about it, I started just writing it down. And so I'm a big fan of like stacking behaviors and skills and things so that I can live life. So instead of having work-life balance, I just have life, right? So internally at Improving, I am also behind, organizing and pushing through with our internal communities. And then I'm also involved with the public community. So I'm having like conversations with you to prepare for this Lunch and Learn. I'm having conversations with other improvers for our internal communities. So there are all these thoughts in my mind and all these conversations that I'm having with different people. I'm like, you know what, let me write about it and put it out there, because this conversation here may be useful to others, right? So it helps me streamlining my thoughts so I can get it out of my mind into something that I can see some shape, right? It helps others out there who might not have been thinking about those topics. And then as we get together here to have a conversation, it's way clearer in my mind how to go through all of those stories, right? So there are so many things that can come out of it that's like, why not do it, right?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's a great practice. In fact, after we had quite a few conversations about it, I'm thinking to myself, instead of my usual post, maybe I'll do a LinkedIn article or something about the event that had just passed for my community. Something that will keep that knowledge, somewhere where people can refer to it.
Yeah.
But this was great. I think that we covered a lot of ground. Are there any questions from the group?
Not currently, no.
No? Okay. Well, I'll do a little plug for myself then, right here. If anybody's interested to learn more about, the communities that I lead, or the business that I run, I see myself as a high performance team strategist. I lead technical teams, but then I also have a venture doing strategy advisory for startups. So if you guys are interested, I do have a website that you can check out. It's my own personal website, like a lot of us here have. But a lot of the links to the various initiatives that I'm a part of is in that website. So hopefully you guys reach out and we can keep the conversation going after this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for me, you can find me through the improving.com website in the Houston office, or you can find out my lassala.net blog, or if you just Google Claudio Lassala, you're going to find my blog and the things that a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here around communities, about technical stuff, about the other things that I do outside of the technical space. You can find it all there. I'm always happy to have people reach out to me and have conversations about, anything that I'm passionate about. I will just bleed your ears off if you ask me about it. So find my areas of passion. If they align, reach out, and I'm always happy to have conversations. So that's it. Thank you guys very much for joining in, and I'm turning it over back to Shervin.
Thank you for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn. And Claudio and Sarah, thank you for sharing Building Stronger Online Communities. The recording of the session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the Session for Improving's virtual events page. While you're at the virtual events page, be sure to register for future Lunch and Learn sessions. This is our final Lunch and Learn for 2020. We want to thank all the presenters who have contributed to making Improving's virtual Lunch and Learn sessions a tremendous success. We all need to thank the IT and Agile communities who attended these sessions. Your feedback and questions are what have made these virtual sessions a huge success. Improving hopes you have a safe and happy holidays. We look forward to seeing you in 2021.